carefully at the policy issues in question. But it feels surreal, and in fact, that interchange that you saw was very tense.
Yeah.
But it got far worse very quickly. By the end of the day, it was anarchy on our campus. People were, including me, were literally being stalked and hunted, and it's a very frightening feeling.
Yeah, I mean, you can even tell by your body language. As you touch your head a couple of times, like there's almost like an exasperation of just like, I cannot believe this is real, sort of. And yet it makes sense that it's real because this monster has been growing for a long time.
It has, and it's been simmering on our campus for a full year. So before the day of absence letter, there has been a movement afoot to increase equity on our campus. And the problem, I don't want to drag us too far into a discussion of the particulars, but the definition of equity has never even been settled on. So there has been zero opportunity to discuss the proposals that have been advanced, and so the proposals are very clearly about equality of outcome, which I can't support because I know my history, and not about equality of opportunity, which I do support. And yet most of the people involved in the discussion either haven't spotted or haven't said that they even recognize the difference.
And even saying that you are for equality of opportunity, even that to a certain amount of people that are sort of caught in this line of thinking, that somehow has a racial undertone to them. Even though what you're saying is you want equality of opportunity for everybody, so everyone's on the same playing field.
Right, and I will say that I don't know, I think we don't know, but I strongly suspect, having studied human history quite carefully and done a lot of traveling and lived in different parts of the world, I strongly suspect that most of the differences in access to well-being that human beings have could be democratized. That the simple fact of having equality of opportunity would solve this problem, which I'm not saying reaching equality of opportunity is easy.
Right.
But if you did it, I suspect that many of the differences that we see between racial groups and their performance would evaporate.
Right. So, okay, so you're being screamed at, they want you to resign, they want you to be fired, they want you to apologize. There's plenty more in that video that we didn't show. Were there any voices there that were, I know that there were a couple people that were your students that were there that are still standing with you right now, but was anyone that was on the attacking side, was anyone saying, well, maybe we misunderstood you, or maybe we were confused? Or was it just, again, that the mob is always led by the loudest voices, so either they're afraid to speak or maybe they don't exist?
Well, we should come back to the question of why, when people look at that video, they see so many white students. That's confusing to people.
Yeah.
But for the moment, let me just answer what you've asked. The pace of progress isn't what people expect. I did not expect to have tremendous progress. I was not responding to them as I did with the thought that they were going to turn around in that instant. But I did think it might plant a seed and that they would come around over the course of days or hours. As they had interactions that didn't line up with the narrative that they've been sold, that they would be forced to think consciously about what explains the fact that this person that we've been told is a vile, transparent racist doesn't sound like one. And I think when I watch that video, which I don't love doing, but when I watch that video,
Right.
I see hints of that. And then I had interactions later in the day where I also saw hints of it. But there's also this overwhelming gravity coming from the argument that describes itself as pro-equity that erases progress. So even when you partially reach somebody, they get reeled back in so quickly.
Yeah. All right, so let's get to the part that you mentioned, which is why are there so many white students? And in some respects, in some of the other videos that are out there, they actually seem more outraged than the students of color.
Well, I think I know the answer to the question. The answer to the question is that there is a syllogism within the movement at the moment that suggests that because civilization is understood to have been built on the backs of dark-skinned people and that they were not remunerated for this work, that white people are indebted, and that therefore when people of color ask for something, that white people should provide it. And what that has led to is a situation where you have basically what I take to be white anarchists that are acting on behalf of a movement of people of color. And there's a danger in this that I'll share with you, which is there's a meeting later, I don't know if we're going to see a clip, but there's a meeting later in which things become extremely heated in a room that at that moment had only one available exit, and hundreds of people enraged at me calling for my head, calling for the head of the chief of police, etc. And their reaction is very dramatic. I did not feel in that moment, and I actually never felt endangered by people of color. I don't think that they would have physically harmed me, but they were speaking in a manner that seemed logical, and I'm not sure that the white anarchists that are doing their bidding are clear on where the boundary is. So I'm concerned that there might be violence of an almost accidental nature here, where people think they're doing what they're being asked because they owe, and it results in somebody getting very seriously hurt.
Yeah, when you say white anarchists, do you think that these kids, in this case, that they're actual anarchists, like they're anarchists for anarchists' sake, or that do they actually think that they're an important piece of the puzzle to this? Or is this just virtue signaling at its highest order? I know you're not a psychologist, but just from the interactions that you're experiencing.
I'm not, but you know, the thing about being close with so many students is that I have a much better window on the thinking amongst different groups on campus than I might otherwise. I think most of the anarchists are actually earnest, and you know, anarchy to them is not an excuse for thuggery, although you know, sometimes it goes that direction. They have an honest belief that, and I almost have some sympathy for how they got here. They're young enough that they haven't seen any functional governance in their lifetime. And so they have a sort of sense that government is synonymous with this, you know, predatory entity, and that tearing it down has to be a step in the right direction. And so, anyway, I think that, you know, they have a sort of deep idea about what world might be if only they could get governance out of the way, and they've missed one thing, and it's fatal to their understanding, or it would be if they knew it, which is scale. What they're talking about is possible in a small group, and you can't scale it up to hundreds or thousands or millions. So anyway, they are thinking about an alternative, and they've noticed very much what's wrong, and they haven't understood, in my opinion, as much about what could possibly replace it.
Yeah, so the other interesting piece of this on the student side is the reaction from some of your students, because you've had some students, white, brown, black, etc. You've had a bunch of students defend you, some publicly and some that are getting heat for that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So I should say my wife also teaches at Evergreen, and we have a huge number of students from the 15 years that we've taught there that we stay in contact with. And so we have actually tremendous support, and there's a wide diversity of people in that group. I have lost a couple of students to this movement. I know of a couple of people who have gone to the other side, which I actually take, I'm not happy that they went, but that it's only a few is heartening, because the penalty, especially for students of color, the penalty for being out of step with the conventional wisdom here is immense. In the video, I don't know if people noticed it, but there's a woman standing to my left, and she's actually in tears. And then later on in the meeting that was so dangerous later in the day, she actually spoke up and spoke on my behalf to this room that was shouting for my head as I'm receiving text messages from students elsewhere in the room telling me there's talk that I won't be allowed to leave. She stands up in this room.
There was literally talk of you being kidnapped or something, right?
Absolutely.
Like, I mean, there's been some crazy stuff here. Yeah.
There was talk of my being kidnapped. I got a text message from another student who told me that she overheard a conversation that people should keep mace hidden. So this was a very dangerous situation. But anyway, this student of color stood up, spoke on my behalf, was shouted down, and then a woman came over to her. It looked like she was assigned to come over to her and explain to my student why her understanding of me was wrong. So somebody who doesn't know me, who's never met me, was assigned to explain to her why her experience of me in my classroom was incorrect.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's move to the academic side of this, because if people think what they just saw was sort of bananas from the student side, the academic side has not been any better. So first, we're going to show a video of another professor. Her name is
Naima Lowe.
Naima Lowe, and let's just throw to that, and then we'll explain after.
Rotation outside the library.
You are now those motherfuckers that we're pushing against. You can't see your way out of your own ass. So don't talk to me.
Oop, I think. All right, we're only showing a tiny portion of that. The TriCaster might have freaked. Can you just sort of explain what's going on there?
Yeah, Naima in that clip is, and the clip goes on for a fair piece, but she's dressing down two other faculty members who are there and telling them that effectively they need, if my understanding of the clip is right, she's telling them that effectively that they either need to go in and make themselves answerable to this mob that's been ruling the campus at that point, or go home. That those are their only two choices, and she says that, you know, they are the problem.
Yeah. Now, she has no authority to do this. She has no right. I mean, she can say whatever she wants to them, but I mean, they have their jobs and they're allowed to express themselves however they want. So just sort of that in itself, it's encroaching on someone else's freedom of expression.
It's preposterous. And I should say that the same faculty member has accused me of racism once very directly in a faculty meeting, and then implicitly in another faculty meeting, she said that the negative reaction to the equity proposal that had been advanced was a racist backlash. In this faculty meeting, when she said that, with the president of the college and the provost sitting right there, I said, you know, somebody at some point should check on the question of whether or not I actually am a racist. I think you might be very surprised.
Yeah.
I was then told by the chair of the faculty that this was not the place to defend myself, and I said, that's fine. Where is the place to defend myself? And then Naima spoke up and said, you shouldn't expect a venue in which to defend yourself. The president and provost sat perfectly silently through this interaction.
So that's fascinating. That's fascinating, because I think for those of us that are not in the world of academia, it's hard for us to really understand just the sort of the little microcosm that goes on there, this little ecosystem that exists and the rules that it plays by and the outside pressures related to donors and everything else that a school has to deal with, and even public schools, that, you know, that they're all dealing with these different things. So, okay, we've dealt with the students, we've dealt with the academic side, but the administrative side doesn't sound like they've been very responsive here, and in some ways they've almost been culpable of the atmosphere that's going on.
Well, I have to speculate a little bit. I'm not an administrator, and so I can't see inside that world very directly, but I have spent a good deal of time in discussion with administrators, numerous deans. I've spoken at length with both the provost and the president. The president, I should point out, is new. He came 2 years ago, and in my opinion, what is taking place at Evergreen looks very much like it is student motivated, but it is actually primarily motivated by a partnership between Naima and the president. And that has resulted in students, I believe, doing tremendous damage, not only to a college that might be one of their greatest assets in getting ahead in the world, but also to the values that were so hard won in the civil rights movement. This does not make the movement look reasonable or good, and I'm very afraid that they are undoing progress that had already been won.
So I think that's an interesting segue, because as I mentioned at the top, I mean, I've sort of been talking about this concept that's happening on the left for a long time, and that they'll come and eat their own, and that these accusations of racism and bigotry and everything else, they've become so over the top, so the boy who cried wolf, that it's almost impossible now to figure out when a real racist exists versus someone that in your case is actually fighting racism. So for you, as someone that, as you said on Tucker's show on Fox News, I am deeply progressive, that's what you said. This must be doubly, even if you were to remove yourself from the equation, this must be doubly painful, because you're watching a movement that you deeply care about cannibalize itself.
Yes, and I will say there's one odd thing I wasn't expecting here, which is, so I feel like the only thing that makes this not a literal witch hunt is that There aren't literal witches.
Right, you're not a witch.
But this is very much that mindset that is unfolded here. But in this case, there are actually 3 witches being demonized on our campus, and I'm one of them. The chief of police, Stacy Brown, is another, and Andrea Siebert, who is our grievance officer. They've been demonized for other reasons. And the fascinating thing is that in each of these cases, the individual being demonized is not just not guilty of what they are accused of, but the inverse of it. And it is shocking. If it was just me, it would be lost in the noise. But to see it repeated 3 times is remarkable.
Yeah. So real quick, you mentioned was it the chief of police? The chief of police. Her name is
Stacy Brown.
Stacy Brown. So Amira, can we throw this image up? So there was an image that at the later meeting that you were talking about, they had her come first. They didn't want her to come. The students didn't want her to come armed. Is that correct? And then they didn't want her to come in a police uniform, correct?
Well, it's worse than that.
Yeah.
So in police circles, being disarmed by somebody carries a special meaning. It's a shameful thing to happen. And so the protesters demanded that she show up in uniform without her weapon.
Right, okay.
She said no, and the administration had asked her to do it, and then the compromise was that she would show up in plain clothes to this very dangerous meeting on the 4th floor. But what you need to know, I didn't know her until she came to check after the protest in the morning. She came to check on my safety, and we met then, and we've talked quite a bit. As I've asked her each day, is it safe for me to come on campus? She'll say, no, it's not safe to come on campus. The administration has stood down the police force. We can't protect you. Anyway, I think that has now changed. But in talking to her, she is the ideal person for the position to address the question of biased policing or police brutality. She's an Evergreen graduate herself. Mm-hmm. She actually, her desire is to address bad policing. She sees it as a terrible offense and she wants to fix the problem. And the protesters, again, I think this is probably coming mostly from the anarchists who have the idea, they in fact have an acronym, ACAB, all cops are bad. They are trying to taunt her into a confrontation that will look good for them. They're literally, they will oink at her when she enters a space. And so anyway, she's professional in the extreme, and so this isn't working. It's taking a toll on her, but she's not reacting to it. But it seems that there's a desire to have a confrontation. Did you get the...
Yeah, I think, did we throw the image up there? If we haven't thrown it up, we'll get it up, and if not, we'll put it... Oh, there we go.
There it is.
So that's the image that was being circulated of the police officer, the chief of police, who came plain-clothed to acquiesce to these demands, and now she's being treated... You know, this is sort of this concept of, you know, like when there's a, Maji Nawaz who's trying to reform Islam will be called a porch monkey or something horrible, or, you know, an Uncle Tom when they'll talk to my friend Larry Elder and people, you know. So this concept, in a way, that's prejudice. That's prejudging them based, you want them to behave a certain way just by how they look and not by what they think.
Well, I've started to wonder about the question about why it's not just random accusations. It's accusations that are the inverse of the person in question. And best I got so far is that what causes you to end up in the crosshairs is some value that you hold deeply enough that you're willing to stand up for it. And so in order to shut down people who will endure harm over a value, you have to level a deeply stigmatizing accusation. And so there's a way in which it is exactly the people who are least deserving of those labels that have to be silenced. You have to work the hardest to silence them, and so they break out the big guns, and this results in this inversion of the truth.
So that being said, I think that there's a lot of people a lot of professors out there that could have been in the exact situation that you found yourself in, that probably would agree with the ideas that you're discussing, that would shrivel under this absolutely. That would just see would have seen your initial reaction immediately in that mob, said, you know what, I'm sorry, I misunderstood it, I'll just continue whatever, and ultimately you'll just be chipped away at for the rest of your career until you just will say nothing. You are doing completely the reverse. The fact that you're sitting with me right now, you just did Tucker Carlson, you're going to do Joe Rogan on Friday. I mean, you are taking this thing and staring it straight in the eye and saying, I'm not going to do this. Where do you think that comes from within you? Because
Well-
that's what people are asking me. People ask me that all the time for themselves. Well, they want to get in the fight and they don't know what to do, or they're afraid of what the repercussions will be, whatever their jobs are, their families. But you're going, no, I'm going to do this.
There are two things, and one of them isn't so easy to bootstrap. It happens that my parents and my grandparents did an A-plus job raising me in a way that left, I believe, no trace of racism. That's not to say I don't have ignorance of what it's like to be black or Indian or Latino. Of course I do. I also have ignorance of what it's like to be an astronaut or be 6 feet tall or any of those things. But there's no part of me that doesn't care or is biased in this way, I think. And so what I have is a lifetime of experiences that say this particular epithet doesn't apply to me. And that means that when they come after me with it, it doesn't hurt. I'm angry that somebody would accuse me of these things, and I'm frankly shocked that my institution would allow these accusations to be leveled and do nothing about it. But I never for a moment thought that in the end this would cause people to believe it. Even if they believed it for this last year, all it takes is stories from my past and it becomes very apparent that this is it's a false charge.
Yeah, well, that's why I wanted you to illuminate that earlier story, because this isn't something that magically appeared. You've had a track record of standing up for the right things. I would be remiss if we didn't mention, I had asked you, we had spoke on the phone about a week ago when we were trying to see if we could arrange for this. And I asked you, I said, well, do you have tenure? Because, what level are you really putting yourself out there? Evergreen doesn't have tenure specifically, but can you just explain what they have? Because that also is an interesting piece to where your future will be.
Yeah, we have something, the founders basically re-envisioned all of the parts of the academy that they thought were deformed, and they built alternatives to them. So we have something called conversion. I started as a visiting professor, so not even a regular professor. I started as a visiting professor. I've now I've been converted, so I'm not impossible to fire, but it's very difficult.
It's never been used before, right, to fire someone, as far as you know?
As far as I know, I can't say for sure that that's true, but I don't think so.
Okay.
You will note, and I think people who are looking at this story and scratching their head wondering what to believe ought to think carefully about the fact that I have not been censured, I haven't been suspended, I haven't been fired. I believe the administration would love to do something just to appease the people who are calling for my head, and the fact that they haven't done it says something about the fact that there's no reason to do so.
Could it also be a little bit of timing, though, because the semester's about to end? Maybe they're just trying to they're not doing anything brave, obviously, and by backing you, by publicly defending you, they're not doing what should be the right thing, but that they're maybe just waiting, semester ends, summer rolls around, people get distracted, and that the whole thing will just blow over. Which again would go to that chip factor that I'm talking about, that it slowly will be chipped away by doing nothing, but it could be a little bit of timing here, right?
Could be, and I wouldn't put it past them. On the other hand, again, the image from the outside is deceptive, and I have lots of contacts from people in the administration who are friendly to me. The provost has called privately to talk about the situation. So I believe the president would like to eliminate me because he is running the college in a way that's very embarrassing, and he would like to keep it quiet, and I've been left with no choice. I've repeatedly tried to take care of this internal to the college and gotten no response, and so finally, at the point that I'm unable to teach on campus for my own safety, I have talked to the press, but in any case, we'll see. I don't think they can fire me. I don't know what they would fire me for, and I think they will create a new problem if they do.
Right, and they could just make it an untenable position to be at, that if they don't do anything or embolden the people who are going after you, that September rolls around and it would just be a position that you wouldn't be able to be in.
Well, we're already headed there, because the fact that the administration has not taken a stand and saying you can't accuse people of racism without evidence or something along those lines has resulted in my faculty colleagues turning on me. Now, I still have a good many friends who are quietly supportive and tell me so, but publicly speaking, I'm being challenged in ever stronger terms, and so it's not going to be a very pleasant place for me to teach come fall.
So that private support, do you find it infuriating in a weird way? I've had a few people who have been in positions like you where they've publicly been called racist when it's not the case. My friend Colin Moriarty, who was on here a few weeks ago, sent a silly, joking tweet about International Women's Day, and International Business Times wrote a headline about him being racist. I mean, really, but bonkers stuff. And he was telling me that the people that were publicly, or the people that were privately emailing him and supporting him but wouldn't do anything public, that was more angering than some of the other responses. Are you feeling a little of that? Like, you're putting your ass on the line, and why are people only quietly, as if they're giving you like some little, they're giving you some scraps?
I don't. And the reason that I don't feel that, I've thought about it, and I've thought, is this cowardice? But the stuff that is coming back at me is so industrial strength that I can easily understand somebody who cannot bring themselves to risk having to end their career in shame of a false stigma of racism when, it's almost the worst thing you can call somebody. So, it would be, strategically, it would be the right thing to do to say, yes, they're being cowards and they should stand up. And there is a part of me that would welcome it if they stood up. But I certainly understand why they feel like they just don't know what they will say in response to the charge. And so they're quiet. What angers me are the people who say nothing, or worse, the ones who have embraced power and done that with the thought that they know who's going to win the battle, and therefore their bread is buttered on a particular side. So, for example, we've gotten to a situation where Naima, who you saw shouting epithets at other faculty members, when she speaks in a faculty meeting and alleges that there is intense racism on our campus that needs to be addressed, the next thing that happens, this happens over email too, is she is reflexively thanked by multiple people, even though what she's saying is, in many cases, vile.
Yeah.
So just the thanking of the real racist is so troubling.
And just for the record, I want to throw up one other thing. Naima tweeted out basically a threat to your wife. Your wife, Heather, is a professor on campus also. And this is really a direct threat that she put up. We'll put it up. And it's this sort of, oh Lord, could some white women at Evergreen come and collect Heather Hang's racist ass? Jesus. That really is a threat. You're saying, someone do something. This woman is on campus. Someone do something. This is a member of the faculty. They haven't even countered that from the administration, have they?
Well, so it's almost unbelievable. So I saw that on her Facebook page, and I took a screenshot, and I carefully purged her identifying information.
love for the street. Street rap like Cali weed, I smoke till I'm sleep. Yeah, nigga.
distanced yourself from the whole thing.
Yeah.
In love. In love. In love. In love. In love.
И родители ее не отвезли в другой город учиться. Поэтому, когда у нее родилась маленькая дочка, то есть
Losers always whine about their best. Winners go home and fuck the prom queen.
Threat, you're saying someone do something. This woman is on campus, someone do something. This is a member of the faculty. They haven't even countered that from the administration, have they?
Well, so it's almost unbelievable. So I saw that on her Facebook page, and I took a screenshot, and I carefully purged her identifying information, and I shared it with my faculty colleagues over the email list. And I, basically pointed out, I said, a faculty member is now threatening Heather. And I was shocked that the response from Naima was that I had misunderstood the post, that in fact collect has a special meaning in Black vernacular. I searched for that special meaning and I could find no evidence of it, which doesn't mean it isn't true. But this is where this question of the right of people of color to boss white people around, especially in an environment where these anarchists are doing the bidding of this coalition, is so dangerous. Even if it is true that collect is somehow a piece of Black vernacular that I'm not aware of, nothing says that the white anarchists know that and that somebody isn't going to attempt to collect my wife for, I don't know, an inquisition?
Yeah, when you've already heard that there were rumors of a kidnapping and all kinds of other stuff.
Well, the police, in fact, told me on Wednesday, that day after the protest at my class, they told me, they called me and said, "Are you on campus?" I said, "No." They said, "Don't come to campus. The protesters are searching car to car and asking for identifying information of the occupants. They're looking for what they say is an individual, and we think it's you."
I mean, the level, the ineptitude or the negligence, I guess, of the administration is off the charts here. To me, that's the student thing. We know this has been growing on campuses for a long time. But when a professor is under that type of threat, and police don't come to campus as a professor, and the administration refuses to say something, I mean, I don't know how much more evidence you need of a deep corruption.
I honestly cannot believe it. The number of things that I have seen that I thought, well, now they have to act, and then they have failed to do so, is unreal. And the fact, I mean, George Bridges, our president, continues to capitulate to demands that are leveled by these protesters when it is explicitly said if these demands aren't met, there will be violence. So I realize he's in a tough predicament, but to continue to throw us under the bus under those conditions can only make this worse.
What do you make about where you're finding allies right now? So, obviously when I heard about this, and I should mention, by the way, that you're Eric Weinstein's brother, who's a former guest of the Rubin Report and has become a good friend of mine. And he's done a very public defense of you, which I think has been really wonderful. So you've gotten some interesting, Jonathan Haidt publicly defending you, Nick Christakis from Yale? Is it from Yale?
I think so.
Formerly from Yale.
Yes, right.
Right. So you've had a whole bunch of people publicly defending you. As I said, you're going to go on Rogan in a couple days. But I saw you were getting some hate because you went on Tucker Carlson on Fox News. Did MSNBC reach out to you? Did CNN reach out to you? Did NPR reach out to you?
Still
Did Huffington
haven't.
Post reach out to you? Did the Daily blah, blah, blah reach out to you? Did Salon reach out to you? Did Vox reach out to you? I can keep going here.
Right.
You see my point?
Oh, yeah.
What do you make of that? That your allies, that it's seemingly that the free speech, non-hysteria allies are all centrists, or certainly probably more to the right of you in a lot of respects, or at least in the classical liberal sense. Where's the backing on the left? You're deeply progressive. That's what you said on Fox News. When's the last time that's been said on Fox News? That's what you said. Tucker even said to you, "You must have voted for Hillary." He said, "I voted for Bernie and I'm deeply progressive."
Right. Well, so I think what's going on is this. I think we've reached a moment where thinking has become very simplistic. And I see this on my campus all the time. When there is a nominally gay side of a story or a nominally equity-oriented side of a story, there is no nuance whatsoever applied. There's no extrapolation about whether or not there might be something that pushes in the other direction. And so what that results in at the level of the press, I think, is how exactly do you process this story, right? If I'm what I say I am, which is anti-racist, then what is the meaning of these protests and the demands for equity at Evergreen? So I think they literally don't know how to report it.
Yeah, it's crazy. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I'll go over here for just a sec. I'm going to do about 2 more minutes with Eric right now. We're just going to put a little bow on this, I think. And we're going to do a live Q&A. We're going to do it on Super Chat right here on YouTube. So you guys, if you throw in a couple bucks, your comment gets bumped up. We'll ask Brett some questions directly. And we're also going to do that for people in Patreon. So if you just comment in the feed right there, we'll get to your questions. So we'll do that in about 2 minutes. So let's just, did I miss anything here in the setup to all of this, where now we're going to kick it to the audience? Is there anything else that you want to add or that I might have missed in the context of this?
Well, there is one thing that I think is very important. I'm getting a flood of email like nothing I've ever seen. The unanimity is amazing, and it is across the political spectrum. It cuts across racial lines. Every known fault line has united, and so I haven't counted them, but it's at least 500 to 1 in support. So that tells me something. If I look at my campus reaction, the faculty are closer to unified against me with, people quietly calling to support and things like that. But the public's response to this has been uniform and extremely supportive. So the difference between the way this looks on the campus and the way this looks to outsiders is profound.
There's a moment, I think it's a little bit past the video that we showed earlier, where you were trying to calm the kids down. I think you were saying something to the effect of this could be, what were you saying? This could be a watershed moment, or this could be a...
I think what I said was history could pivot in this hallway if we could hear each other.
Yeah, and I thought that, so it's a beautiful phrase, first off, but it really showed that you were sort of, again, 5 minutes before that, you didn't know it was going to happen, but you were really, within yourself at that moment. Do you think that that's where this could be at, that you could be thrust into something that all of us in this space have been looking for reasons? This ball has been rolling down the hill and picking up steam, and some of us have been sort of fighting it, but a lot of people are just getting lost in the spinning. Do you think that this truly could be a moment, because it's so ludicrous what's happening here? There's no iota of evidence of the charges. Do you think this could be a moment that pushes it? Answer me that, and then we're going to take a quick break and we'll go to the questions.
Yes, I do. And the trick, in order to make that happen, and I really do want it to happen, in order to make that happen, the story has to stay out of the narratives that are supposed to explain it on both left and right. In other words, it has to be kept in conscious space where we don't just push it to some sort of known animal. So I think that could happen. I hope it does happen. I'm afraid that some momentum is going to get behind some version of this that's going to cause it to be dismissible, and then it won't, and who knows what the next episode will look like.
Yeah. All right. Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take literally a 2-minute break. We're just going to stand up and stretch. You want a shot of vodka or something?
I'm good.
Do that privately. And then we'll take your questions on Super Chat and on Patreon. You can just comment in the feed right there. Hang on 2 minutes. We'll be right back. All right, guys, we are back with Eric Weinstein, biology professor.
Brett Weinstein.
What?
Brett
Oh,
Weinstein.
his brother is Eric Weinstein. This is Brett Weinstein. I got the Weinstein
Yep.
part. I said
That's all
Weinstein,
you
not
really
Weinstein.
need.
That's pretty good.
That-
Come on now, give me
you're right.
something. We are back with Brett Weinstein from Evergreen State University. He's a biology professor there. If you caught what we did in this last hour, he's involved in really a big mess with false accusations of racism and just so many of the things that we talk about here related to free speech, related to a lot of the problems with the left right now, and with so much of what's happening in society at large. So I thought, I asked you questions for an hour. Let's open it up to the audience. So we're taking questions live from you guys on Super Chat, on YouTube, and from Patreon. So I thought this was a nice way to start. And it's barely a question, but I will let you comment on it. And this is from Super Chat. It's wonderful, encouraging to watch, quote, live as individuals on the left awaken to the dangers of radical leftism. I see that as a pretty clear statement. I've been trying to warn people about this, the difference between liberalism and leftism. Do you feel that you're awakening to something that maybe you didn't see that much of just in the past couple of years?
I
Or
wouldn't
is it
put
deeply personal now, you know?
No, I would put it differently. I would say that we all need to level up. And the fact is, there's nothing wrong with liberal progressive values. In fact, I think they are the right values. The understanding of how to accomplish those values, how to elevate them, it's not good. The standard left progressive vision is not rich enough to actually function. That said, I don't see a functional version on the right either. And so I don't know how to say this exactly, but the older I get and the more I see, the less I think there is value in the left-right dichotomy, and really we all need to go up. We need to find a new level and new ways to describe what differences we do have about how to accomplish what ought to be universal goals.
Yeah, I have a lot of video game people that watch the show, so I think the idea of level up,
Exactly.
will resonate with people. This one was sort of interesting on Patreon. I don't know that it's directly specific to the way you teach, but I think you'll get the thrust of it. Do you feel like you helped create this environment by teaching these kids that colleges are racist and the system oppresses all minorities? I suspect that you specifically didn't do that, but I think what they mean is sort of that leftist ideology is so predominant in colleges.
I do not feel that what I've been doing contributed to this in the slightest. In fact, quite the opposite. So what I do is I arm kids with incredibly powerful tools of reason. And I use evolutionary biology as a landscape in which to teach critical reasoning. But really what I'm doing is teaching them to think in a very careful, nuanced way. When I look out at these protests, I'm struck by the fact that I'm teaching at a small college, and I have a lot of students, and I don't recognize the people who are challenging me. And in fact, the students that I do know tell me that they can imagine if they had not encountered me and my wife, they might have been sucked into this. But I think this, again, is a place where we have to recognize that science is actually the cure for low-quality thought. That science, I've been saying, is the ultimate bullshit detector. And really, my message to those who are protesting is that equality will be reached much more effectively if you arm yourself with the best possible tools for getting there. And those tools are contained in the sciences.
Yeah. I love how we all come from this, or come to this from our own discipline. So I've been pushing the idea that the cure for this is true liberalism and using logic and reason and real liberalism of live and let live. That's really the answer here. But you come at it from a scientific place and using that as the basis. There's a lot of fertile ground for us both to work on this from there, so I love that. This is interesting from Super Chat. The church I volunteer for turns a blind eye to this issue. I've brought it to pastors, but I'm completely dismissed. Roughly 95% of our congregation are left. What can I do? I've seen people socially lynched along with myself. So I think when they're saying turn a blind eye to this issue, I think they mean the issue of false accusations of racism.
Well, so I've been doing something for as long as I can remember, which is, and I actually did learn this from Eric, who taught me that the most important things you need to learn are often the province of people that you wouldn't ordinarily be talking to. And so in the environment that I teach in and in my life outside, I very much enjoy trying to cross gaps that are supposed to be uncrossable. So for example, when Jehovah's Witnesses come to my door, I very frequently, I mean, I always talk to them. I will often invite them in and I'll tell them, look, you got your work cut out for you. You're talking to an evolutionary biologist, but let's see where we can get to.
Yeah.
So
and you give them a couple minutes?
Sometimes a half hour.
Wow.
So my point is that actually I learn a tremendous amount from talking to people that I'm not supposed to be talking to. And that has been a very useful skill in the classroom as well. But what I would say is in the context of the church, figuring out what the mindset of people who are ignoring this is so that you can get to it and figure out, the trick is to get them to rise to consciousness. If you're getting a reflexive answer, it's coming from a part of the mind that isn't conscious. And once you can get the mind to throw an error, it is forced into consciousness. And once you throw that error, it's forced into consciousness, you can have all kinds of conversations.
This is from Patreon. This is interesting because it did strike me when I watched these videos. Where do you think the extreme use of profanity by the student protesters comes from? It's because it's not just yelling for yelling's sake, but there's a ton of profanity in it. Is that just emotion?
I'm not sure. I guess I would say there is. So the fact that the accusations that they level have no content to them tells you that they are actually tactical. That they can turn you into a straw man, and that doesn't mean that they've failed just because they're incorrect about you, as long as the stigma attaches. And so what I would say is we all process cursing differently. I mean, that's why Tourette's syndrome is what it is that somehow we store those words differently. And that means that when you face them, maybe the brain realizes that that's an indicator that you're only a couple clicks away from violence. And so for the person who will stand up, if you start hearing those words tossed at you, it kind of says, hey, cool it. So my guess is whether the protesters know what they're doing or not, it's a tactical issue.
Yeah. This is interesting from Super Chat. For people outside of the U.S., to what extent do you feel that what's happening at Evergreen is symptomatic of a general trend in U.S. campus culture? We touched on this a little bit, but you're in a very specific version of it. Do you think that this is the trend? This is the real thing that's happening right now?
Well, I've been talking to my wife and my brother about this, and I think the real issue is that in the 60s and 70s, a new type of scholarship emerged around critical theory, and at the moment it's critical race theory at the front. It has reorganized the fundamental nature of the academy because it is built from an incompatible set of assumptions from the sciences and the other disciplines that work forward from assumptions to conclusions. And because of that, the two can't really be in terribly close contact. They have to be compartmentalized away from each other in a normal university setting. But that also means that science is not in a position to check critical race theory. And so critical race theory has reached some conclusions that I believe are not valid, and it is now in a position, in such a strong political position to dictate those terms to the sciences that we are seeing a kind of reversal of fortune. I don't know if that answers your question, but yes, I would say that Evergreen is having a very particular version of a pattern that is being seen across the academy in this country.
I don't think this is a question, but somebody may be doing something very nice for you. It says, reward free speech heroes, GoFundMe Brett Weinstein free speech. Your fans back home are proud of you, Brett. So I don't know if that means they maybe created a GoFundMe for you, but I guess you'll find out. This one, I don't know that you're going to want to show your cards so easily. This is Super Chat. At what point would you quit working at Evergreen if this continues, and what would you do afterwards? You don't have to answer that in any way that's going to create a bigger problem at the moment. But.
I mean, I have to tell you, since Tuesday morning at 9:30, I feel like I'm living in some kind of odd dream. I mean, parts of it are nightmarish, parts of it are reassuring. But in any case, I haven't even really been able to think carefully about what this means. It's a hard enough issue just to even figure out whether I can hold class on campus or it's going to be in the park again.
Yeah. I may have missed what this is referencing, but what was the question? This is from Patreon. What was the question being asked of you regarding the physics department? Are you sure what that's referencing?
What was the question that was being asked?
There may have been something in that whole melee with the students. No?
Well, I can't imagine. I mean, for one thing, we don't have departments, so there isn't a physics department.
Oh, okay. This is interesting, and I'd be happy to facilitate this. Have you had any contact with Jordan Peterson? Do you know Jordan Peterson up in Canada?
I know of his work. I admire him greatly. He has retweeted a couple things, and as soon as things die down, I certainly do intend to get in contact, but I haven't talked to him yet.
I will be glad to facilitate that if you'd like.
Great.
Here's another one on Patreon. What can we do to help Brett and his supporters? That may be the million-dollar question for everyone else, right?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I guess I would say a lot of what is going to take place has to do with the narrative as it's going to develop. And in fact, the program that I'm teaching right now is focused very heavily on the importance of narratives in getting people to alter the way they function. So I would say the danger of this story getting sucked into some known narrative, at which point it becomes useless, is great. And so in conversations online, keeping people in their conscious mind as they engage this so that they can actually tease apart the different aspects of it and understand them as they really are rather than as the cartoon version. That would be very useful.
Yeah, and to me that seems so real because I don't know how much you know about my sort of political evolution or where I came from, but you know, when I saw that whole crazy night, my audience knows this because I've told it 1,000 times, but that crazy night of Sam Harris on Real Time with Bill Maher and the fight with Affleck and gross and racist and all that, and I saw the way this guy was being slaughtered, that forced me to get involved. It just got me to a point of saying, I can't take it anymore. And it got me there, and now there are people that defend me from some of that. So it's just we need more of us. And
well, that's an excellent answer. And I think the thing is, imagine everybody is somewhere on the spectrum of courage. And imagine that when somebody crosses over and can't take it anymore, as you've just described, and they speak up, that creates cover for the people in the layer right below them. Mm-hmm. And if this is to become a turning point, having those people who know better emboldened by the people who've stood up before them, that is the way it will turn.
Well, you got it from your brother, you got it from me, you got it from Joe, and you got it from many more. You got it from many more because my iPad's blowing up over here. This is interesting on Super Chat. Brett, were you previously aware of this anarchist element within progressivism? What are your thoughts on why progressivism is the foothold for these anarchists? I think that's interesting because you've addressed the sort of white allies of this that really are more anarchists. Did you realize that they were a piece of progressivism as a whole, which obviously you really like?
I've understood that this anarchist thread was important and needed to be taken seriously since Occupy. That's the first place I really understood what it was. And I didn't necessarily expect it to function this way. I have seen things in this last week that are so overt with respect to a racial hierarchy that is the inverse of the usual hierarchy, but nonetheless, an overt racial hierarchy on a college campus just shocks me every time I think about it. But once one wraps their mind around the fact that that hierarchy is going to emerge in overt form, it makes perfect sense that the white anarchists would show up as they do.
All right, another one on Super Chat. Has the left, which for so long has used the epithet racist liberally when attacking the right, now painted itself into a corner? Is this just the beginning or the culmination? I guess we'll sort of find out where your adventure goes with this. I suspect you hope this is the culmination, but...
Well, yeah, I hope we've hit bottom, is what it is. Yeah. And really, well, actually, maybe I'll just say this. It looks to me, as I look across the landscape of forces, that almost every coalition is an unholy alliance between two things. In the case of this equity movement, most of the people in the equity movement are interested in equity as their objective. a small percentage of the people in the equity movement are interested in reversing the oppression. They don't know that they're two different factions because until you reach equity, they are pushing in the same direction. But they really want things that are fundamentally different from each other. So my hope is that every coalition will look at itself, and the honorable people, the adults who are willing to give up some of the sacred stuff that surrounds their movement, will join together. And basically, a coalition of the reasonable would be an excellent thing to come out of this.
This is, we'll jump back to Patreon for a moment. This is good because I mentioned to you before we started that I was recently at a conference over a weekend where there were 400 college professors all talking about how do we fight this stuff, and this is before sort of all this had bubbled up publicly to you. So the question is, basically, the thrust of the question is basically about donors. Like, is that really the answer here? That you've got to hit these donors because ultimately these forces, if they realize there's no money in this, will stop doing this stuff.
So in which context are you asking about the donors? Are you talking about the college context?
Yeah, I think in the college context that really hitting the donors, that if you can't make headway with the administration, which at this point is being grossly negligent, it seems, in defending you, in not defending you, that maybe if you go for donors generally in these schools, that's the way to affect change.
Well,
the bottom line is the bottom line.
We're in a very difficult position because we're a public college and we're hovering at the border of fiscal coherence. So what I would say is, I don't know how Evergreen gets out of this because this is obviously damaging to its reputation and we can't afford that. I hope that somebody, a donor that is in line with progressive values, will step in and save the college. And I don't know if that's conceivable or not, but there is something there very much worth saving. And frankly, even these protesters stand to gain a tremendous amount if the college can right itself, find its original values, and move forward towards the noble version of equity rather than the one that they're pushing towards.
Well said. This is something that I've thought about from Super Chat. I believe that the U.S. is the largest export of culture. My biggest fear is that we are radiating this polarity across the globe. Across the globe. What are the implications?
That's a great question. And this has changed so much in our lifetimes because of the way the cultures are now linked together. So this is a tremendous danger, which is that good ideas can spread, but so can bad ideas. I will say I'm starting to get lots of mail from overseas, and I don't know what it is that caused that to happen. But I do think I'm ashamed and saddened that it's my institution that's causing it. But this is a wake-up call. And maybe the point is, having seen this over social media, people will not capitulate to movements that are pushing towards illiberal ends.
So this is Super Chat. This is slightly off exactly what we're talking about. But why do you think it's acceptable for neo-Stalinists, say Marxists and communists, to wave the hammer and sickle flags in our society when flying the neo-Nazi flag rightly gets a disgusted reaction? Do you even want to... Have you not got into enough trouble yet?
I don't know that there's a winning answer to that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, let's just say this. I think
if we can get you in a lot of different troubles, then it could defray the main trouble.
That's just what I need. I need everybody united with me as the common enemy. Yeah, maybe we'll just leave it at that.
Okay, fair enough. All I can do is promise to ask the ones that I'm asking. I can't force you to answer anything. I'm not sure if you'll know about. Well, let's not do that one because I don't know about that one yet. Brett, I fully support you, and it may not feel like it, but the support is there. What would you suggest we do to resist these social justice warrior actions? So just for the regular person, I think we've sort of addressed this already, but is there anything else just for the average person that doesn't want to publicly do something maybe, but...
Yeah. Realize that most of them are good people who are confused about something and have gotten caught up in something bigger than they are that isn't headed in a good direction. But they are reachable. I mean, you can even see that in the clip of me reasoning them. And the more of us that are actually compassionate about the fact that there are real problems that need to be addressed and they haven't been addressed. And maybe this is the thing to say. The oddness of this protest at Evergreen is hiding a more difficult truth. We have desperate inequity. If that same protest, that same intensity of protest was directed at inequities in our system of jurisprudence, it would make a lot of sense. What I think has happened is that the university system is being attacked because it's a soft target, not because that's the place that is spreading all of this inequity. And so it's incoherent in the context of the university system, but really it's just pointed at the wrong thing. So if one goes into talking to social justice warriors with the mindset that they're making it up, that's, I think, sadly, partly right. They're making it up at some level about the university system, but they're not making it up entirely. The inequities are there, they're very important, and they're crippling. So give them the benefit of the doubt with respect to the fact that there is something that they are responding to, and then talk to them about whether or not they're in fact pointed in the right direction.
Yeah, I love that. And look, you can't force them to sit down, but it's why I always say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. These people who I often have huge disagreements with, I don't disagree with or deny that they believe what they're saying is right. So we have to at least give them that to then be able to do this. This is a good one from Patreon. Can we get even 5 thought leaders on the left to publicly denounce these regressive trends and help us create a dialogue on the better ways ahead? I think this is particularly interesting because it's related to sort of you being on Tucker and invited to be on Fox and nothing from MSNBC or NPR or Huffington Post or any of that other stuff. That the left, I think, has been so cowed by these words of racism that they just won't stand with you publicly, even if they know that they should. So the leaders just simply would rather throw you to the wolves by doing nothing.
What is this left you speak of? I haven't seen them in so long.
Yeah. I mean, where are the people that should be, forget you for a moment,
Right.
but just as these trends have happened for a while, where is the broader left that should be standing up for free speech and for all of these things?
I don't know. It has dropped below the threshold of coherence for some reason.
I like that. Well, I don't like the idea of it, but
Right.
I like the way you said it. Let's see. This is on Super Chat. Someone said, please ask Brett about the high art of communication. It will be worth it.
Please ask Brett about the high art of communication. Very good. So
it got there somehow.
yes, it
Okay,
did.
good.
It had to connect with a particular. So one of the people that I've been working with is the wrong term, but collaborating with in trying to envision how civilization might be altered so that it actually functions and doesn't put us all in jeopardy. Is a guy named Forrest, who has come to the conclusion that the primary problem that we face getting to a functional system is that people don't know how to talk to each other anymore. And he's been working on a system for essentially bootstrapping, schools is the wrong term, but events that would cause people to develop the capacity to talk to each other in an ever deeper fashion. And having done so, the hope is that what will emerge from that is really much tighter language, that most of us, because we share a basic language, speak as if we know what we're being heard to say. But in fact, when you get right down to it, anybody who's doing high quality work in some corner has had to narrow the definitions of their words. And when two such people get together, there is intense confusion until you've hashed out those differences. So the idea is the high art of communication is actually a necessity if we are to be able to talk about the issues we face at a sophisticated enough level to really address them.
As an interviewer, I should probably be doing a little more research on this, I think. You know, it's so funny. I've accidentally called you Eric once, and it keeps almost coming out of my mouth. But basically, you throw a beard on Eric, and you get him a slightly more, form-fitting haircut, and I've got him right
I've heard
across
this
the-
before.
Brett, with the responses on Evergreen and Berkeley, how can conservatives find a voice on campus today? What are your thoughts on what the further escalation may be by either side? I think the first part's interesting because you're not a conservative, but I suspect you wouldn't have a problem with more conservative voices being heard.
Well, I must say, as I said at the beginning of your program, I'm sort of abandoning this continuum because I just don't think it's useful.
No.
It is amazing how much more likely at the moment it is that if I sit down with somebody who says they're a conservative, that we're going to have an interesting, productive conversation. And it's not because I'm a conservative, but it's because I think if you're a conservative, you've been challenged in a particular way for so long that you've had to deal across aisles before, whereas the left is more insular. So one thing I would say to whoever asked that question is consider whether you are in fact a conservative. To me, a conservative is somebody who wishes for the structures in place to be preserved as they are. And I can't imagine how a reasonable person looking at the structures the way they're functioning now would find themselves in that situation. Is conservative, is that label doing you a favor?
Look, just the word itself doesn't sound cool.
No.
You want to get young people, you can't use the word conservative, right? Why are we, this is Super Chat as well, why are we letting these children have their way? Won't rewarding bad behavior only perpetuate it? I think that's a particularly good one because it shows what the position of the professors is at. It's like they don't want to be treated like you are now treated. So they do let these kids do things that they probably shouldn't. The kids can do whatever they want, but I mean, they don't challenge them in a way that you should be challenged at college.
I think this definitely applies to the way the administration has handled the demonstration. It shouldn't be negotiating based on threats. As far as, I think these kids is also a little too simple. You know, there's a lot of structure within even the group that's protesting. And, you know, there's a video that you didn't get to here. There's a video in the middle of the day, on the day that I was challenged, in which the protesters, or some of the leaders of the protest, have corralled the president. I think he's, you know, I think he's essentially literally a prisoner. My understanding is he wasn't even allowed to go to the bathroom alone. But they're talking to him about their demands, and they're, I believe they're mistaken about a number of things, but they are totally understandable, and one can relate to them. And I had the feeling watching it, wow, I really wish I could be in that room, that the president is blowing this because he's negotiating with them rather than this is the ultimate seminar. This is the place where we can have this discussion about, are the things you're asking for reasonable? What would be reasonable? What are the real problems? And he didn't do it.
Seeing as there's an interesting theme here, and I think they're going to this because you're a person of the left. This is Super Chat. Seeing how liberal arts colleges seem to be indoctrinating students with mainly postmodernist ideas, what needs to change to have an open and honest education? I think you've already hit this, right?
Let's just say that that's not the right portrayal. The sciences, especially at Evergreen, are extremely strong. What they are facing is an overthrow. And the key is not putting the postmodernists in a position to dictate terms to the hard sciences and the other fields that are earnestly interested in inquiry, you know, be they history or whatever.
So that's interesting. So you can, not that you want this necessarily, but you could almost let them play in a certain area for a while, and maybe that's what we all did for a long time. But now you're seeing it encroach into the hard sciences, and that's where the real threat is.
The chickens have come home to roost is what it is.
Yeah. Well, I'll put you on the spot with this one. This is Patreon. Do you think that after this ordeal is taken care of, the president of Evergreen should step down for his slow response to de-escalate the situation on your campus?
Ideally, I think he should step down on Tuesday of last week. I can't imagine, I mean, it is so insane that he allowed the 4 o'clock meeting that nearly boiled over into violence, where the chief of police literally told me she thought that she and I were in severe danger in that room. To have allowed that to happen and not to have to shut down the college is clear negligence that put people in danger of life and limb. He should clearly resign.
Yeah. You'll like this one. As a biologist, see, we were going to get to biology here somehow. As a biologist, do you see the actions and events like this and others as an evolution or de-evolution of the human species? That's a good one. And can it be both at the same time, perhaps?
Well,
I'll add that part.
Okay. How about this? Human beings are a very unique creature. And if you think about what you know about human history, you will realize that human beings are a species that, without changing substantially in form, has switched from one niche to the next as they've moved across the globe. So we are a creature that is capable of reinventing ourselves very seamlessly. What has happened here is that the cues that say it is time to reinvent ourselves and to behave in a different way have not hit their mark. And so I believe what's happening is somebody has, not somebody, but some force has prevented us from evolving as we would normally do into a new and more stable phase. And so what you're watching is the boiling over of a system that has outlived its usefulness in the absence of the natural change that should replace it.
Here we go. Professor Weinstein, is there any improvement or conflict that you could imagine coming in the next decade or so with society at large, with the left or society at large? So you are hopeful in some ways that if this is a watershed moment, that things could start turning.
Well, I'm hopeful on two fronts. One, the academy needs to get its footing, because no matter what your view of the way forward is, we need an entity that's capable of figuring out what's true. So let me just say this. If critical race theory wins the battle with the sciences will reformulate somewhere else. They will have to in order for society to function. And then critical race theory and its postmodern partners won't be able to survive alone. You can't have a university built on that alone. So I'm hopeful that this will cause people to wake up, and that when it does, the sciences will be shored up and we can return to work. At a societal level, I think we need to realize that all of the mechanisms that have functioned to produce positive change in the past are not going to work in the present context, and we need to start thinking outside the box.
You got 15 minutes more? We'll do a full hour of Q&A. Can you
Sure.
hang for 15? Okay.
Absolutely.
All right, so we're going to do 15 minutes more. So if you've got some more Super Chats or you're on Patreon, let us know right now. This thing's growing fast here. This is Super Chat. As a rising senior starting to look at colleges, I'm equally baffled and horrified at the extent of affirmative action. I obviously have a horse in this race, but do you think I'm justified or biased? Now, interestingly, this person didn't say what their race is. We can deduce something, but what do you make of the question?
Well, I mean, it's an odd question. I'm noting the term affirmative action in there, and I must say I'm not against affirmative action. I'm not convinced that the structure is the right one. In other words, we all know that it has problems and that it creates stigma for people. But I believe some structure is justified and that we ought to be earnestly searching for what it is. So that's about the best I can do.
This is a good one on Super Chat. How do you reconcile your views on equity and the horrors of all equity-based ideologies over the last 2 centuries? This is sort of that, I think that road to hell is maybe a good intentions thing.
No, I mean, I think that person is synonymizing equity with equality of result. If that person thought about equality of opportunity is, in fact, something we all ought to be able to agree on. I mean, if you're...
But does it always get morphed into equality of outcome? Are there real instances where, I know we can fight for equality of opportunity all day long, and plenty of other people do, obviously, but it seems like it always gets morphed into equality of outcome.
I think it's a special case of capture, and that really one of the largest problems, maybe the largest problem that humanity faces, is that in the modern environment, capture comes for everything sooner or later. So the fact that equality of opportunity gets captured by equality of result is one more instance of a malady that we have to address generally.
This is Patreon. What percentage of university students do you estimate condone or participate in the silencing of non-leftist opinions and even facts on campus? I don't know that you have a hard number on that, but just from your experience right now, what do you think?
I would say it's a much smaller percentage than people realize, that these protests are so overwhelming. I would say almost all of my campus has some sympathy with the protests. I mean, you know, as I do, I'm not interested in preserving privilege, and there is privilege. I don't think it's happening at the college, and so I would say the vast majority of students are not participating in the protest, nor would they support its excesses. But there are sympathies because there are real problems.
Oh, this is interesting. Is there research that the hard sciences are being pressured out of performing? Do you know of anything right now that they're getting hit on?
Well, I don't know that that's exactly how it works. I think what it is it works through taboos and stigma, that there are certain things that one can't study. And in fact, one of the things in the letter that I wrote that caused such a stir was that I was offering to give a lecture, if people wanted it, on day of absence or at any other time, on the evolutionary view of race. And people immediately assumed that they knew what lecture I was planning to deliver and that it was, it was basically scientific racism, when in fact it would have been quite the opposite lecture. So what I would say is the idea that we can't go to certain places because we know that they are weapons of oppression is a stifling world to work in. And it's the taboo we need to work on.
Are things really as bad as they look on college campuses?
No. Yes. Yeah. Unfortunately, they are.
Would you have said yes 3 weeks ago?
Yes.
I mean, that says something right there. This is Super Chat. How do I answer my Christian family when they say there has never been a gain of genetic information from one generation to the next? And is the geologic column an actual thing outside textbooks? The second part of that went over my head.
Yeah,
So maybe
I'm
you got
not
it?
sure exactly what they're talking about. Let's
Okay.
do the first part,
Yeah.
though. So this is a very important point. It's going to be a little bit hard to convey in this format, but there was a spectacular failure in the study of evolution at the point that DNA came to be understood. So Darwin, of course, knew nothing about genes because he didn't have the tools to know. At the point that first genes were discovered and then DNA was understood to be the genetic material, the mechanism was so elegant that people assumed that is Darwin's mechanism rather than that is a Darwinian mechanism. And what that did is it removed the ability to understand how a creature like a human being evolves, because human beings, we do evolve genetically, but that's not the primary way in which it occurs. The primary way in which it occurs is a replacement of the software program. And so we still have not dug ourselves out of the hole and built the toolkit that can address those questions properly. So I would say, yes, human beings have not altered in a major way well, it depends how major a way, but we have been like we are for something like 200,000 years, but that doesn't mean that we haven't been revolutionized over and over again by the replacement of one software program with another.
This is from Patreon. Who do you believe is most responsible for the oppressor-oppressed dynamic that these students seem to live by?
Responsible for creating the dynamic? Is that what you...
I would guess that that's what the question is now.
Oh boy. Well, the answer isn't a fun one. The answer is that human beings are genetically predisposed, like every other creature, to favor behaviors that cause the exclusion of alternative genetic spellings. That's what every creature is about. And what that means is that human beings, like all other creatures, when an opportunity to spread genes is the result of a kind of oppressive behavior, that is favored. And so one of the things that I've been trying to explain to people is evolution has given us some gifts and it's given us some hazards. One of the hazards is that people are wired to be more generous with those who are more closely related, and that happens at every scale. And so the same force that causes a mother to love her offspring causes one population to go to war with another. And we have to allow ourselves actually to be inconsistent and to favor maternal love as we reject war. So my basic point is this is not a simple problem. We have to realize that evolution is playing a role in creating human behaviors, and that what it is pointing us towards is not always honorable.
And by the way, I think in the video that we showed, there's a further portion where you start explaining that. And even saying that was eliciting a response to people that somehow you were pushing some sort of racial identity on people or something.
Right. Well, I think the danger is that once people start hearing about genes and exclusion, they think that you're advocating. for it, rather than saying, actually, this is a warning. We have this dangerous mechanism built into us. It doesn't have to be triggered. There are lots of times when people are not, you sit around the dinner table with people who aren't closely related to you, and you're not constantly thinking about whether you can steal their stuff. So we can turn these mechanisms off, but we have to be deliberate about it. And, really, ultimately, we have to build a society in which children develop in an environment that reinforces the standing down of those mechanisms.
I like this because it gets right to mechanisms. What legal structure would you remove or replace to provide more equity of opportunity? So if we're going to really get this equality of opportunity there, is there anything that you would remove or replace that exists right now?
Well, that's a very big question. I would say the ways in which power reinforces itself are many, and they are insidious. They show up in places where they're not labeled in a way that you can recognize them. So I would say we would have to actually, you would have to go through all of the mechanisms that allow society to function in order to discover things that hobble. So anyway, I think it's too big a question to answer in a short form, but it's a very important question.
Fair enough. We've got 5 minutes left. Brett, I feel like too much focus is on students in these situations. 18 to 20-year-olds across the nation are not organically spawning these ideas. How do we confront the faculty who perpetuate this? So we talked about that a little bit, that these students are being led in a way. They're not just magically coming up with these ideas. What's been your best technique with the faculty member maybe that's teetering either way?
Well, unfortunately, and this is why I think it is this issue that is boiling over in this particular fashion. The stigma is so intense that there is no way for almost anybody to challenge a faculty member wielding these epithets. Unfortunately, the rules have to be structured such that those who stand up are protected by their colleges. In other words, there have to be penalties for trying to stigmatize somebody. And unfortunately, we are in an environment where if anybody proposes such a thing, they will be stigmatized and the reforms won't occur.
Yeah, that's interesting because you haven't said anything about asking or calling for the woman, I'm sorry, her name one more time. Naima, to step down, but because really it falls on the administration and the president, not necessarily on her. She's saying what she believes whether you like it or not.
Well, get this. The first time that she came after me, I went to the president of the college and I sat down with him for a couple of hours and we talked about the situation. And she is in fact on the Equity Council. And my feeling is anybody who is so blatantly biased in a racial fashion doesn't have any business in the discussion of equity. And I told the president this, and I said she has to be removed from the Equity Council in order for the Equity Council to have a prayer of doing their work. And he said, effectively, yes, but that's the provost's job. And so I went to talk to the provost, and he agreed. He said it was the president's job. And so privately, there was agreement that she needed to be removed, but publicly there was nothing.
Since this seems to come out of the humanities, do you think that the difference between scientific method, meaning empirical falsification, and critical group theory accelerates political division?
Could you repeat that?
That's a big one. There's a lot there, and we've only got 3 minutes left, so we're going to do one more after this one. Since this seems to come out of the humanities, just this battle that we've been talking about now for 2 hours, do you think that the difference between scientific method, meaning empirical falsification, and critical group theory accelerate political division? I have to parse this a little bit just so that I fully understand it.
I think I got it. I would say it results in inevitable division because the assumptions of the two mechanisms for inquiring are not compatible. The assumptions from which these two modes proceed. So what I would say is, this is a place, actually invoking the humanities is the way to address this. The humanities are not inherently postmodern. The humanities can be addressed with the same or similar assumptions as the sciences. And when you do that, actually you get very powerful stuff like guns, germs, and steel, for example. Mm-hmm. And so really the point is there's a set of assumptions that really can't be allowed to persist within the university system because it is destructive of all of the other work that the system can do. And that's really the solution to the problem.
Yeah. All right, there's a whole bunch here that we could keep getting to. I suspect this is not your last appearance on the Rubin Report, whether you like it or not.
All right.
I want you to be able to speak when you have Rogan in a couple days, because you're going to do 3 hours of this with him. So I asked you at the end of the original interview if you had some final thoughts. But now, after seeing just sort of the theme of some of these questions and everything else that we've talked about, is there any last thought that you have? And then, then we'll step outside and go walk my dog, and we'll take a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, I guess I have one thought. We have either an indefinitely large number of problems, or we have a small number of problems and an indefinitely large number of symptoms. If you're caught in a narrative that's a familiar one, it's not rich enough to address the problems that we face. And so what I would ask is that everybody should look around in their own corner and figure out what assumptions are here that I haven't checked that might be getting in the road to understanding what other people are talking about.
Yeah. I was going to send people to your Twitter at the end of this. Is that where you want me to send them, or should we?
Yeah, why not?
Where else can we send them?
No, that's probably the place for now. I'm probably going to put up a channel at some point.
It's at Brett Weinstein on Twitter. That's with one T. It's usually with two T's. What happened to that other T?
My parents were reasonably strapped for cash when I was born, so.
All right, well, it's been an absolute pleasure. You obviously know you have an ally in me. I think this thing that you're on, sometimes people just get thrust into this, and it's truly an honor that you chose me as the first person to sit down and talk to about this stuff, because we need each other. And I don't mean just we, but I mean all of us, anyone watching this that gets it. We need each other, and I think maybe this will hopefully be a seminal moment that we got some of the wins back on our side. So I appreciate you taking the time.
This was an honor for me too, and thanks for having me on.
All right, thank you guys.
Time now for campus craziness, and tonight the title is not an overstatement, it really is crazy. Consider Evergreen State College in Washington and Olympia. Every year the school holds a day in absence. In years past, non-white students symbolically left campus and attended anti-racism events. This year, student activists demanded that all white people leave campus or else. Brett Weinstein refused. He's a professor at Evergreen State, and he called the race-based demand, quote, a show of force and an act of oppression. In response to that, here's what happened.
This is not about you.
I'm talking.
We are not speaking
all about him.
On terms of white privilege. This is not a discussion. You have lost that one.
You said some racist. Can you apologize? I did not.
Stop telling people of color they're useless. You're useless. Get the
History could pivot in the direction of the values that you are standing here for.
Yeah, resign.
What?
Resign.
You're not resigning.
Wow. Professor Brett Weinstein joins us now. Professor, first of all, thank you for coming on. That looks like something, out of Phnom Penh, 1975. Was that, what exactly was going on there? What happened?
Well, what happened is that 50 or so students decided to disrupt the class that I was holding that morning and demand my resignation.
Because you wouldn't leave campus because you're white?
Well, they imagine that I am a racist and that I am teaching racism in the classroom, and that has caused them to imagine that I have no right to speak, that I am harming students by the very act of teaching them.
What happened after the video cut out?
Well, that's an interesting story. The campus police apparently showed up outside of the classroom. The protesters then blocked their entrance. I did not call the police, someone else called the police, and they were concerned for my safety. But when they tried to come into the building to make sure that I was okay, the protesters blocked them. And because the issue of policing is so sensitive at the moment, the police had to run around and find another entrance to the building to get inside and check with me. At the point they did that, the protesters moved on and corralled the president of the college at his office They extracted some demands from him. Among the demands was that there would be a meeting, well, actually, demands is perhaps the wrong word, a concession, that there would be a meeting at 4 o'clock in a large room on top of our library building. That meeting took place at the end of the day, and believe it or not, it was far crazier than the video that you just showed.
This whole story is so over the top that even though we do a lot of these, it's hard for me to believe it's real. So the core demand is that all people of your skin color leave the campus. Your president is a guy called George Bridges. Where was he?
Bridges.
Why isn't, there he is right there. George Bridges is supposed to be running this school. Why is he allowing a mob to threaten one of his professors?
Well, I must say, I have some concern that the story is so strange that it's not even going to make sense to an audience that isn't local to the campus. Dr. Bridges is allowing this mob to effectively control the campus, and they have been in control since 9:30 on Tuesday morning. At this moment, I believe Dr. Bridges is answering a set of demands put forward by the protesters, and they have said that if he does not accept their demands, that there will be violence. I do not know what his response to those demands is going to be, but I know that that's taking place at this hour. He has also told the police to stand down. So although the campus police have a sense of what it is that needs to happen in a circumstance like this, they have been hobbled by the fact that they answer to the college administration, and in fact for several days have been barricaded in the campus police station.
Oh my gosh, this is like something out of another country. It's just hard to believe any of this is real. And just our viewers should look this up online, because there are a lot of pieces to the story. It's hard to convey on television, but you had this, I thought, powerful line in your letter, and I assume you're no kind of right-winger. If you teach at Evergreen, I'm sure you're, a Hillary voter, but you had this
No, not a Hillary voter. I'm a deeply progressive person, and I must say
there you go.
I'm troubled by what this implies about the current state of the left.
Well, you think? You said people shouldn't be allowed to speak or not on the basis of their skin color, which seems like a foundational belief of the left, and one that I agree with strongly. And for that, they physically threatened you and are trying to get you fired. This is
yes,
unbelievable.
They are absolutely trying to get me fired, and they believe that my words in my email are transparently racist, and I think we're caught quite off guard when people who were not at Evergreen read my letter and couldn't find any racism in it.
Well, yeah, just the opposite. Professor, Godspeed to you, and I hope you'll come back with an update on this story, because it's really one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. Thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.
If you found that compelling, next Monday we're putting on a full hour of campus stories, dedicating it to the madness that is consuming our college campuses. Here's a preview of that. You have an absolute right to express your views, period.
You're right.
Do they not teach?
Right.
Okay, then, and that would include whiteboards, no? I mean, it's kind of simple.
The idea of freedom of speech is essential to our country. That's literally what our country was founded on.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that you can disagree with somebody and have that conversation, that's really good. But I will say, there's...
I'm standing up to the First Amendment. If I were to go to a rally and people said, I'm just pulling this out of thin air, pigs in a blanket fry like bacon, about police officers advocating the killing of cops, I mean, you would say that's unacceptable. That should not be allowed. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying if student group wants to have a discussion about police brutality or racism,
if they were to use that phrase, pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon.
I'm not interested in the phrase. I'm not going to debate you over this phrase should be allowed or not.
Because you have no principles. That's why. That's coming up Memorial Day at our usual time, 8 p.m. Eastern. Grab a beer. Up next, a Republican congressman thinks the U.S. Well, good evening and welcome to a special edition of Tucker Carlson Tonight, the Campus Craziness Edition. As a country, we invest a tremendous amount of money and power in our higher education system. We count on our universities to train future leaders who will, we hope, preserve the freedoms that built and sustained our country over hundreds of years. But is that happening? How well are those freedoms being preserved on campuses? That's the subject of tonight's show, a special hour-long edition of Campus Craziness. Now, no campus represents the shift more vividly than UC Berkeley. In the 60s, Berkeley was the heart of the free speech movement. Now things are very different. Troy Warden is a student at Berkeley and also works as a correspondent for Campus Reform. We talked to him recently about the current intellectual climate at his school. So you went and spoke directly to the so-called anti-fascists. What did they say when you talked to them?
Well, Tucker, thank you for having me on. And I just want to let my story be known. I went to this meeting because I wanted to have these anti-fascists own up to the violence they've perpetrated and permitted against our club. And I, quite frankly, called them out. I asked them to simply condemn the violence that's been perpetrated against the Berkeley College Republicans. And their response was, quite frankly, very disappointing. They failed to even acknowledge that it occurred. The person, the leader of Refuse Fascism, Samsara Taylor, said that she didn't even know of the occurrences. And this is completely unacceptable because I've gone on the media multiple times. She's been on this program before. And I've written about this on campusreform.org multiple times. We've had members punched in the face. We've had members spat at, pepper sprayed. I was almost beaten up during the February 1st Milo Yiannopoulos riots. And she refused to acknowledge them and actually said not all violence is equal. She suggested to her supporters that in some cases violence is completely acceptable if someone disagrees with you.
And she said the same thing on this show pretty clearly. Do you get any sense that they're calling themselves anti-fascists ironically? Here you have people dressed in costume committing violence against people whose politics they disagree with, and they're anti-fascists. I mean, are they serious when they say that?
Well, partly, but also partly not. You know, these groups are receiving funding from persons such as George Soros. Yeah. This, quite frankly, is exactly the kind of line that they are going to pull because it's going to get them a lot of funding from very liberal donors. So if they take a very strong stance against Mr. Trump and his supporters and they label them fascists and they go out onto the streets and commit political terrorism, physically intimidate and verbally intimidate conservative students on campuses and other Trump supporters in the streets, then I think it's the best way for them to receive the amount of funding they want.
It's grotesque that anyone would be funding political violence, but people are, as we've noted often on this show. Now, what is Berkeley as an institution doing to protect you? They're all about safe spaces. Your space does not seem very safe to me.
Well, that's the ironic thing. The Berkeley College Republicans have never and will never ask for a safe space. But many other groups have. Black Lives Matter, for instance, blocked white students specifically from going to class in protest. They had a whole list of demands, including safe spaces. But the Berkeley College Republicans have simply asked the city of Berkeley, the administrators of the University of California, Berkeley, and the UC Police Department to simply protect our rights, to give us the proper amount of personnel and security. And instead of doing that, they slap very large security fees on us, usually over $5,000 for a conservative speaker. And then when rioters do show up, when violence is perpetrated, when threats of violence are made, they either have their security and police and peace officers stand down, or, in fact, they cancel our event even before we're able to put them on. So in all these cases, what you've seen is high-profile and even low-profile conservative speakers prevented from speaking on campus because the university is too cowardly to defend their mantle, the mantle they proudly proclaim every chance they get, which is the birthplace of the free speech movement. And like I wrote on the night of February 1st, I said the free speech movement is dead. The very birthplace of the free speech movement is also its grave.
Wow. I don't have anything to add to that other than how old are you?
I am 21. I just turned 21.
Man, I was nowhere near as articulate or as brave as you are when I was 21. I'm impressed. Trey, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker.
Well, UC Berkeley may be the most visibly nutty campus, but the mania has spread just about everywhere in the country. We've had a lot of students on this show from all over who have pretty remarkable ideas about how they ought to conduct themselves on campus. From vandals to socialists to segregationists, here are some of our favorite student guests in the past few months. You need to be allowed to say what you think. And what you think doesn't have to be popular or constructive or polite for you to be allowed to say. You have an absolute right to express your views, period.
You're right.
Do they not teach?
Right.
Okay, and that would include whiteboards, no? I mean, it's kind of simple.
The idea of freedom of speech is essential to our country. That's literally what our country was founded on.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that you can disagree with somebody and have that conversation,
that's
really good.
Student.
But I will say, there's Tucker, let me finish here. There's a difference between you expressing a view and then you providing intimidation and harassment to another student.
So it seems to me if you're going to ban whiteboards, why stop there? Why not ban pens and keyboards and other instruments of divergent opinion and just kind of suppress speech and everyone would be happy? You're a pretty articulate person with a precise command of the language, and presumably in an article this long you could explain exactly what that action, what form it would take. And in this case you said it takes flipping cars over. And my point is, someone paid for those cars. Like, those aren't your cars. And to destroy other people's property to make your political point isn't really a valid path, is it?
Well, first of all, they flipped cars when the Cubs won. But secondly, Tucker, I mean, so I think that, yeah, it's an article, and I exaggerated. But, I mean, I'm trying to explain now what I think I actually mean by political action that doesn't consist in sort of sanitized or moderated Q&A sessions or bipartisan roundtables at the Institute of Politics.
Can you name a single example where a speaker has been physically prevented from speaking by conservative students?
I know basically that Barack Obama and Alice Walker have been sort of denied, or at least attempted.
They were not stopped from speaking. Nobody put their bodyguards in the hospital. Nobody threw rocks against the building or pounded on the windows. Conservative students have not, that I'm aware of, and I would denounce it immediately if they did, stopped any speaker, and yet you see it on the left, and yet your piece doesn't say one word about that. I wonder why. I would defend the right of anybody to say something I disagree with, and you ought to too, and especially as a college student, and I think you're still a college student.
I'm a graduate student, and I actually
teach. You're a graduate student, you teach, then you're in a world that was created specifically to protect people who have non-mainstream opinions.
But that space does not protect everybody. Let's be clear about that.
Apparently it doesn't. It doesn't protect people you disagree with.
Does it protect people who advocate killing cops? Do you think that will go well? If someone wanted to go and speak on a college campus, a tour that said that talked
the time.
Really? I really want to know. I really want to know where there's anybody.
Have you been to a Black Lives Matter protest?
Absolutely not. I support Black Lives Matter. I would never support Black Lives Matter if they advocated killing a police officer.
Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon. Pigs in a blanket, fry like bacon.
So if I were to go to a rally and people said, I'm just pulling this out of thin air, pigs in a blanket fry like bacon about police officers advocating the killing of cops, I mean, you would say that's unacceptable. That should not be allowed. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying if student group wants to have a discussion about police brutality or racism.
If they were to use that phrase, pigs in a blanket fry like bacon.
I'm not interested in the phrase. I'm not going to debate you over this phrase should be allowed or not.
Because you have no principles. That's why. Because all the things you've been saying for the last 11 minutes are totally untrue.
And I came here because I thought I would get the same respect from you.
You just revealed who you are. You're basically saying the flag represents evil to the extent that it shouldn't be flown. And my question is, why is it always kids who make that point? Why is it always kids from a 62,000...
you